delighted to be able to welcome Inma Martinez, calling us, speaking to us from Spain, which is brilliant and quite appropriate, as I first met Inma at an event in Bilbao where she was speaking about AI, space and superhumans, which was absolutely brilliant. And we've since engaged with Inma a little bit as the catapult around some of the AI and data work we do. But she's an industry recognized technologist, having pioneered AI personalization and been involved in a range of other disruptive digital technologies. She's also a very well-regarded entrepreneur, having had a number of successful exits. She's a partner in Deep Science Ventures, and I'm really excited about everything Inma has to say today, from the needs that we're seeing out there, the opportunities around AI and data, some of her perspectives on innovation, and some fantastic thoughts on space. So without further ado, over to Inma.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be part of this day with everyone. I was mentioning earlier that at Imperial, only just last week, we had a very similar innovation week. It was actually a hackathon at the business school with Harvard, UCL and MIT. And the purpose was to look at the new COVID-19 society and think, what should be the products and the services of this new reality. But we find ourselves in a very different position in the aerospace industry, in the satellite industry, which is, this is the decade in which the perfect storm is coming to really make this a real sector and an industry and a reality. So one of the things that I'm going to be touching base is, where are the opportunities that are ahead of us, and where I see the different participants, especially UK companies, that they can really take the baton and create relevance and innovation for the world, not just for the UK. So I like to start every single keynote I do reminding everyone that anything in this life that becomes a big transformational force starts with something very small. When I first heard of the internet, or what the internet was in 1992, way before the CERN released the internet to the world. And at the time, I didn't think twice. I just considered it that this was a really interesting technology. And then on April 30th, 1992, a fax machine at Goldman Sachs in Zurich, where I was, showed us these two pieces of paper. And the CERN wanted to be more legalistic than innovative. So the fax was signed by the director of research, and not by Sir Tim Berners-Lee, absolutely not. It was the disclaimer people. They were releasing the internet. They were telling us where the servers were. We could use the HTML legally. But if we were to build odd things that would turn out really bad, the CERN didn't want to do anything to do with it. That was the launch of the official launch of the internet to the world. And from those two pieces of paper, only 20 years later, the whole world has changed and our lives have changed, and we are in a complete digital era. So remind yourselves that whatever you're working on, even though it's small, even though it may be at a very early stage in development, everything starts like that. Everything starts on a pilot, on an MVP, on a prototype. Nothing really descends from the skies completely formed. It's a constant life of iteration towards innovation. And when people ask me, what's the natural reaction of humans to radical transformations, I always show this image. When Henry Ford began to manufacture 4Ts, it was a society of horses and carriages. And only around 7 years later, the entire world, in America especially, were driving his cars. And when people ask me, 10 years ago, I was asked, what do you think of IoT? And then I would talk about things that sound like Alexa, and people thought, no, that's never going to happen. Well, look at us right now. So humans have a tremendous ability to embrace anything that is new, that improves their lives or improves the way they work or live. It's simple as that. And it can be digital and it can be analog. It can be a new chair. It can be anything. We crave the concept of better. That is what has built our civilization, make things better. So when I was in banking, I worked in banking close to 10 years. My last sector, what I was doing was infrastructure finance. And the Öresund Bridge was my last project before I went to Cable and Wireless. Cable and Wireless in 97 had a change of CEOs. The new CEO had hunted me out, said, come to the strategy team and take charge of internet protocol services. There were no websites in the UK, by the way, but there I was. When we built this bridge, we never built the bridge as a traffic management tool. We wanted to create GDP for the region. Malmö, in those days, in the 90s, was a tiny town. Nobody in Sweden would go there unless your parents lived there. And Malmö-Copenhagen connection has created an economic zone for Scandinavia. When I was approached by the European Space Agency in early 2018, and they asked me to collaborate with their Space for Inspiration, Space for Exploration endeavors, which is when we met later on in that year in Bilbao, Sam and I. They came to me because I have always looked at scientific development as a way to explore, as a way to create movements towards civilizations, human civilizations moving into the future. So when I looked at the space industry, I immediately made the connection. We are building infrastructure in low Earth orbit or cislunar geographies. We are actually building what we used to build in the 90s, but now we build it out of Earth. So we're building an economic society, not just, building new space stations just because it's cool, as the space industry used to be. So transport, which is the big catalyst in economy, obviously my biggest sector. This was one of the biggest projects I've ever done, 9,000 kilometers privatized in Belo Horizonte in Brazil. When you build the roads, you can have trucks coming in with goods. People move, you regenerate economies. Exactly what the aerospace transportation is doing. This whole revolution that Elon and Bezos immediately reacted to it like good entrepreneurs that they are, has other manifestations, micro launchers. And that is incentivizing companies to come to space because now it's affordable. It's exactly the same mental parameters, very similar business models. You make transport cheaper, people transport more, outsourcing, etc., etc. So when we talk about why we are in this industry, is because we humans explore. I always show that picture and people never recognize this man. And it's very sad that, we have a picture of Darwin as an old creepy man, when indeed, when he explored and when he built his hypothesis and his thesis, is because he spent at 22 years of age, 5 years at sea, traveling, circumnavigating, building up his catalog of images, of drawings, of thoughts and concepts about the species. And obviously, that's what we go as far as Mars. We want to know. we want to explore, is the natural thinking, is the natural way that we humans have of creating value and progress. And obviously, Humboldt and Bonpland, which look very handsome here, like posing for the cover of GQ, that's not how they were when they were climbing onto volcanoes in South America. In fact, they endured so much physical pain because they used to go all the way up with barely no tools, obviously no oxygen. They proved that at high altitude, the oxygen is depleted. So they tested on themselves, which is what our astronauts team is right there in the picture, testing on himself. So explorers and scientists have this incredible connection of moving forward, go into the territories that are unknown. That is what drives this and any other industry that requires individuals that have passion for what they do. That's what we continue to do at the International Space Station. In fact, I was really glad this weekend when Jim Brittenstein mentioned several times that the main thing to focus is that we want to make the ISS, you know, the biggest lab that there is to attract industries and like you know, medical diagnosis or medical developments and pharmaceutical companies. This is what resonated with the world, because in fact, I had calls all weekend and even today from radio stations for me to comment, like, what is it that he's saying? What's going on at the International Space Station? I said, well, you know, it's a massive lab. So we are now moving towards a transformation in the industry that is more commercial than ever, and therefore it's open to more entrepreneurial efforts and projects. In 5 years, we will look back to today and see the enormous progression. So one of the examples I use to show people why we put satellites up there is, apart from obviously helping with meteorology and with, you know, climate change, we're beginning to extract data that we're using for other purposes, industrial purposes. This is an interesting case that I found at the University of Colorado. I teach remotely over there, and it came from a project where students took data that was focusing on ISIS controlled territories. They monitor the flares, the activity, and they realized that from 2014 to the next, out of 87,000 oil rigs that were active, the number dropped to 35,000. And in 2016, it was just 14,000. So they concluded that ISIS could not be making any money from the oil industry, just extortion. And they passed that information to Langley, to the CIA. And at this point, the CIA recognized that they were clueless. They were like, how did you find? So when I talk to entrepreneurs in the space industry, I always remind them, the day that we get satellite data AI ready, these will jump. Sentient 1 and 2, God bless Copernicus, that data is not AI ready. I have worked in 2 projects where the cleaning and the normalization of the data has to happen before we can actually do things with it. So this is a great opportunity. In the digital industry, I remember I was a mobile pioneer. We had the same gap. In 2002, you had an entire plethora of entrepreneurs like myself and companies wanting to have WAP services. And then the networks were awful and completely fragmented. So the connection and the glue, the middleware, took about 2 years to come into place. So this is a great field to be looking at. AI normalization, AI ready data that comes from satellites. I see this as an enormous potential. Why am I saying this? Is because I have worked for 10 years in smart city projects, and more, smart cities are becoming data-driven cities. This is a snapshot of Boston and its dashboard to manage the city. It is a dashboard that any citizen can access. They can see how the mayoralty is performing, how quick they fix roads, how many books were loaned at the library, etc., etc., etc. But not only that, the mayor and his team, because they possess this data, they can create better deals for the city with other data-driven companies, for example, Waze, or for example, Uber. And they found that Uber was only sending cars to rich neighborhoods, and they were never sending cars to working class neighborhoods. So the mayor said, look, we have the data, we've seen it, this is shameful. Either you service everyone in this town or you will not operate in Boston. For the first time, cities realize that data is important to them, and if they manage well, they can create quite a huge change in the services that citizens receive. And of course, data now is of exascale proportions. I spoke to Andrew Ng, who used to be the chief data scientist at Google. This was the man that was training Google to recognize images like about 8 years ago, and now he's working exclusively for Baidu. And he told me that he and his team are working on speech recognition bots. Nobody wants to chat keying on a computer. You want to talk to a bot. The human language is, is easier. And he told me that they were on sometimes 20 exascale, exercises. Exascale is 1 billion calculations of data per second. That's enormous, enormous. And companies like Inditex, the owners of huge retail brands like Zara and many others. This is a company that is now on its second data center. And I've been in that room. I was impressed with the amount of detail that comes through the screens. If someone leaves a light on at a shop in Zara in Beijing, these people in northern Spain know. And I thought, wow, talk about mission control in Germany, yeah? It's like, this is private, this is a corporation. So data is beginning to be a massive, massive tool to use and leverage for business. And we know that telecommunications are going to go beyond 5G because of nanosatellites. It's one of the biggest things that I see coming in the next 5 years. But the most interesting thing is people will finally understand what goes on in space, because on Earth, the infrastructure will also be invisible. Nobody can see the satellites. So most people don't know that their signal for TVs or telecoms comes from actually a satellite up there. But cities, because cars will be self-driven, are already planning to lift off all the traffic management infrastructure. So the connections between cars, the signaling into a management platform will all be invisible. We will go into a world in which things will happen and we will not see them, but we will accept that they exist, which is going to favor our industry. I'm currently writing my second book on what's happening to the automotive industry after a good year of working with Audi. And last year, I even worked for Ferrari in the Formula One. And it's all about the data and what these cars can do once they send and receive data. It's all invisible infrastructure, just like space. And we know as well that one of the major reasons why we're exploring space is because we need to create new sources of energy. And of course, we have all heard Jeff Bezos, delivering his evangelical speech as to why Blue Origin is in this path, and that by 2050, if you put photovoltaic around every geography of the Earth, it will not suffice. Well, I went and talked to one of the leading companies that builds data centers. And I said, right, I'm going to prove my theory. And I said, when you build a data center, like the one you're building now for Inditex, by the way, you put like self energy generators like photovoltaics next to it, so that, you know, at least this monster, you know, gets its own energy. And literally they said, no, Inma, we would not have enough with that. I mean, the consumption of energy is bigger than what these fields can do. So we need to start venturing out into looking for new energy sources. And we will have to coexist with all of them available to us in all different shapes and forms because of, you know, the real need for all of them. So where we find ourselves, and this is one of the things that I mentioned to my students at Imperial, is sciences have achieved such level of transformation and innovation that now, because we have created a digital society, because we have a society of great technological tools, we can just pretty much do anything. Science is not asking itself, what is this? It knows what it is. Now it wonders, what can we do with it? So some of my students, for example, have created new molecules. And because now we have much better tools to analyze subatomic particles, we're discovering that they have structures never imagined by scientists before us. So science is achieving a huge Splendour decade right now. And when our physicists receive Nobel Prizes, what they're doing is basically proving Einstein, because now we have the equipment to actually photograph black holes colliding. In fact, this is what Dr. Thorne achieved in 2015 and 2017. So in 2015, Logan, you know, the laboratory that monitors, you know, black hole activity, photographed one. And then not even 18 months later, they photographed a second. And obviously now the Academy in Sweden finally had to give them the Nobel Prize. You know, it was like, what are you waiting for? A third time lucky? So it's because we have the tools. We always had the theorems. We always had the formulas. We always had the visions, but now we can really build it. Now we can really test it. And that is our decade, 2020. So what is happening to progress is very interesting, because when 2019 began, in just the first 14 years, all of the patents and innovations that we achieved in the 20th century, the number, we surpassed it. In academic circles, the way you measure progress is you account for how many world patents have been filed, how many innovations, how many discoveries, and then you account for, it's quantifiable, and you say, oh, 53,000. So in 14 years, we not only achieved that number, we even surpassed it, which means that progress in our decade is no longer quantifiable, because if it's a numbers game, we already beat it. It's about creating value for society. When entrepreneurs, when companies today build products and services, they aim to create value for society. That's the aim. It's not about filing patents anymore, because look at this. This company, which we are all very familiar with because it's a successful British company called Brompton Bikes, has 0 patents, because every piece of that bike, even the screws, are made to measure. And when I interviewed the CEO, he told me that usually a Brompton bike has about 800 to 900 pieces. So it will take an enormous amount of time to actually concoct something like this and try to beat them. So companies like these are creating value, and yet they're not filing for patents. And the famous challenger banks, when they came out and the media began to call them banks, I always said they're not banks. They are not banks. And they said, what are they? I said, they're mining our data. They're data mining companies. And obviously, thank God, 3 or 4 years after, you know, their value, their capitalization is all based on the intense knowledge that they have about the people that use their services. It's all about intelligence. It's all about data mining, something that the traditional banks have never bothered to do. It's not about deposits. It's not about savings. It's not about mortgages. And cybersecurity, which is a sector that I have worked 3 times at different moments in my life, used to be about creating mods, firewalls, you know, fighting for these spots, waiting for the attack. Whereas now, the teams that work in cybersecurity are analysts, people that constantly think about potential threats, but in a creative way. So the teams that work in cybersec are not teams that are building molds of firewalls. They're constantly thinking, how can someone come in and erode our business? So it's a creative, it's a detective work. And this is an example of the changing of the times, because we're moving from a quantifiable society to a qualifiable society of creatives, of thinkers, of people that imagine. And it is because of neoteny. Neoteny is curiosity, human curiosity. And all animals have curiosity. You need it to find food and find a mate and find shelter. But human curiosity is what made us walk on 2 feet, is what made us explore, come out of the jungle, what the anthropologists say. And that is what enlarged our neocortex, that movement upwards and that curiosity. And it's called neoteny. And what do we do with neoteny? Well, let me demystify for you something. What is the difference between iteration and innovation? In this picture, the innovation is the first wheel, the very first wheel built of stone. All the other wheels are simply iterations. We are making it better. Yeah, it's a typical 18th, 19th century, 20th century mindset, making things better. Let me show you what 21st century mindsets do with a wheel. They do this. It's not round anymore. It's not round anymore. And I'm going to show you why it's not round anymore. Because unlike the traditional wheel, it literally scoops off obstacles in your way. And why am I showing you this? I'm showing you this because the mindset of the innovator of the 2020 is one that will challenge everything. We all thought the wheels had already been invented. The box is ticked. Great. No, no. Anything can be transformed and disrupted. Nothing is sacred. This is what we're going to be seeing in this decade. And we've already seen it. You know, the Orbex guys in Scotland, 3D printing the engine. I'm sure the first time someone suggested that, somebody said, please go home and take a nap. But this is where they are. And with 4D printing, the amount of things that are being challenged and now repurposed via a 4D print, you know, from body parts, from materials for construction, buildings that will have 4D printing structures. This is what the availability of resources, of technologies, of materials will create for the innovators. The persons are the same, incredibly neotenic people. It's only that now they finally can have a conduit for their creativity. So we are in the perfect time. And tech farming, which used to sound, you know, completely out of a sci-fi film, if you go to Ocado these days, Ocado has built a hydroponics farming warehouses in Holland, where their technologies, whether it's robotics and hydroponics, have become an IP for the company. And the stock last year, in just 12 months, went from £2 at the FTSE to almost £12 because they built IP around tech farming. So all of these things are beginning to take a shape that is very real and very mundane and accessible to all of us because people have those visions and they have the tools. And machine intelligence, which is my field, is also moving towards a society of intelligent machines that take on board tasks that should have never been performed by humans. This is one of the biggest statements, and people wonder, like, why not? Because human brains are non-computational. We only have a capacity up to a certain level of IQ, and then it's just impossible, or visualizations. So for example, the oil and gas industry has been using AI for 30 years. This is how they prospect and manage, their properties and their assets. This is actually a slide from BP. All of these are data points that build the simulated image. It's insane. And in the car industry where I've done work, we don't build cars for real anymore and then put them through a wind tunnel because it's super expensive to run a wind tunnel. Everything is simulated. And why? Because in simulations, we can really stress the car beyond limits. We can exert, thermal forces, crash dynamics that are extreme, that will never happen, but we want to test the car and put it to these extremes. And in medical diagnosis, which is one of the things that Imperial has been leading for 5 years now, you will not want a human doctor to look at your blood samples, CT scans, or MRIs and tell you if you have a tumor. Because human eyes are very easy to deceive. And I always explain that this is why magicians have jobs. So you want a machine that will detect out of 10,000, 20,000 images if you have cancer markers. This is why I'm saying the machines that trained by us will be able to come and help us. And the same thing for the animal healthcare. At the University of Surrey, they finally came with a training of an algorithm that will notice extremely millimetric changes in the faces of sheep. Now you ask any farmer, can you tell if the sheep is in pain? The faces look the same. It's like cats. A good day for a cat is like the bad day and the great day and a hungry day and a sad day. It's the same face. It is us. There are changes. There are changes. So these inroads that we are able to do in the different fields of scientific endeavor is thanks to machine intelligence, the way we use it for a good purpose and for the benefit of society. And the same thing for drug design. Before COVID-19, I had been about 5 years at Deep Science Venture mentoring drug development projects that were AI-based. And then when COVID-19 hit, my students were bamboozled left, right, and center. Can you come and help? There is a Novartis. Every single pharmaceutical company pre-COVID was already shifting towards this because AI simulations allow them to develop drug therapies in half the time and for an amount that will never be again $2 billion in 10 years, that was their business model. So, and even design, when you start to design objects, machines can also be trained to create designs. I came across this example at the Open Golf in Northern Ireland last year, and I met one of the people that fine-tunes the clubs for players. And he saw a presentation I did on AI, and he said, I need to show you some pictures. I work for Callaway, and this is what we're doing. And I thought, wow, what is this drive? And he said, our design team decided to allow an AI program to suggest designs that will perform the way we wanted the drive to perform. So when you give machines computational tasks, they deliver computational things. It's not that the machine is Salvador Dali. It's never going to design like an artist, but it's giving you the best approximation to an industrial design, which is applied science. So this is the era that is right with us for us to create the next products of the future. So when Garry Kasparov lost to IBM Big Blue, in those days, it was Watson's father, everyone thought that that was the end of humanity. Oh no. And it was because we lived in an Mensa society. You know, the IQ people are the best of them all, and the rest of us, well, I'm sorry, you are no. Is that society is already controlled? I'll delete it. It's not the human that really functions and creates an innovation in these days. Our humans today, the ones we need to address the problems that are coming to us, are emotionally intelligent people, creative people, people with social skills, people that can look into blue skies, people can look laterally at things, multidisciplinary teams. I encourage you to hire multidisciplinary teams and bring them into projects, because they bring with them the skills of other sectors that will really, really see what you don't see. It's one of the things that is transforming every single industrial and engineering sector that is, you know, changing today. And yes, Google hasn't trained algorithms. You have trained the Google image recognition algo. You, every time you tell them you're not a robot, that's who's training the algo, you. Because humans have an incredible ability to use inductive and deductive thinking. Only a human can see what is a statue and was not. Machines are very, very, you know, capable of doing many things, but not when it comes to shapes, when it comes to creating different modes of thinking, different ways to extract understanding. That's what a human brain does. So the name of the game in this decade and the future is not about intelligence, it's not about machine intelligence, it's not about IQ, it's about cognition. Because cognition is to know what's happening, to understand it, and then to imagine how to deal with it. That is cognition, the understanding and the implementation of what do we do now. And that comes from us, from our creative brains. So I would leave you with 3 great examples of product innovation. Try to always repurpose. Don't build things from scratch. I'm sure that there is another industry out there that has built something that you could learn from or even use it. When Kodak went bust, why did Fujifilm remain? Well, this is why they remained. They looked at all of their patents, and they had by then 60% of the patents that are about photon manipulation, meaning how the light reflects on surfaces and comes up. So they decided that since we all stopped buying films and film-based cameras, they would develop high-performance cosmetics to protect the skin from the damages from the sun, how the light from the sun refracts on your skin. What this company has done is a complete revamp of themselves and their business models. So they are now almost a meditech company. So with the patents, they build functional cosmetics. With their photo cameras, they build medical equipment based on image photography, and then the expansion of all these into biopharma, etc. This is Fujifilm today. It's still called Fujifilm. It's very sweet. The Japanese haven't changed the name of the company, but this is repurposing. You see your assets and you wonder if they could be useful in another industry or in another way. The second one is make anything you build accessible. If it's hard to ship, if it's hard to put in the market, if it's at a price that is impossible, it will not be successful. the flat pack economy that emerged from that famous IKEA flat packs box has now transformed many industries, but this is one of the ones that is just, in Germany, for example, there is now a huge percentage of the market of houses that are built like this, flat pack. They arrive, they build them in about 3 hours. It's plug and play house, plug and play house. And third, make it sustainable. Not just because we want to be conscientious with nature, it's because it's a better economic model. When I go around and I speak at space conferences and people ask me, you know, do you think that SpaceX is because they have better engineers than ULA? And I'm like, no. It's because Elon has a company with real capital from investors, and he needs to use every penny that he had in the bank. He had to recover the boosters. He had to recover the rocket. He had to build a sustainable business, not anymore a business where you throw money at the wind. So build a sustainable product. It will help you not just with your numbers, but also attracting capital. You know, when you see sustainable business models, you know that the money is created, is turned into assets rather than being thrown out. And last but not least, I always tell people, if you want to create progress, you need to deviate from the norm. You have to look at ways that nobody's looking at it from the same angle. That has created progress always. And I will finish here, and I will be so happy to take your questions if you have any questions for me.
That was brilliant, Inma. Thank you so much. I mean, the perspectives and concepts that you've just enlightened us with, I think, are going to spark synapses all over the place. So you've definitely sparked a few questions. So I know you've got to disappear by 20 past because you've got another commitment, but if I could take a couple, that'd be great. So sure. The top one was, what's the main blockers you see for users to engage/trust new products and services based on these invisible infrastructures? How do we approach those when we design such services? Consumers always want to see what they get from something. So the basic design levels are usability, functionality, conveniency. Normally, when you build a product, like this is my mantra when I was at Nokia Innovation, a person will make that decision within that minute. Is this usable? Yeah. Is it functional? Yeah, it works well. Is it convenient to my life? Then how do you actually make them buy it and retain them? Is when you build a brand for your company and where you stand for, that you can embed in the product. So if you want to be known as a company of innovators, for example, that people mention your company's name and say, oh, those guys are always creating amazing stuff, then the product has to have some truly amazing something, or they will not see the connection. If you want to build your brand as a trusted, quality obsessed company, the typical German product, yeah, then you have to deliver it via great customer service, great packaging, clear instructions as to how this thing works, clear instructions like if something doesn't work, that is how you build it into the product. The product speaks for you, so it has to be a connection. Brilliant, thank you, Inma. Next up is something drawing on your entrepreneurial experiences. So when you're considering partnering with another personal business, what factors are deal breakers for you?
Wow, there's so many. I'm going to answer in the other way around. So when you partner with someone, your motives have to be aligned. This is actually the class I teach at Imperial, how to create value chain and alliances. So it must be clear what they get from this deal, what you get from this deal, and everybody's clear on that. If that is not clear or is never mentioned, it's going to go bad. I always encourage people to work with partners that they know well or that they're nearby, because you have to create clusters of benefit that is easy for you to interact with your partners. So if you try to create a partnership with someone that is like 16 hours time frame, it's hard. It's better to work with someone down the road. And always assume that the lifespan of each company, you know, is going to change. And maybe at some point in the future, what they want is not what you want, and then you will part ways. If you can agree at the beginning how you will part, it would allow you to eventually part away amicably. Everybody had it very clear. And the day that you're not happy, this is what you do and this is what we do. And that completely irons the way for the future. Nobody needs to freak out. Oh, I wonder if we tell them we want to part, what are they going to do to us? No, it's already in the contract.
Brilliant. Thank you. And I think we can squeeze one more in under the wire.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So a lot of big ambitious initiatives in the space sector arise in the US/Silicon Valley. What can we do to stimulate an environment of super ambitious innovation entrepreneurship here in the UK and Europe?
Wow. I think, well, first of all, the UK is considered one of the most dynamic, innovative places in the world. We're not, you know, in a hole here. I think one of the things that is helping, and I encourage everybody to do that, is many venture funds from the US have moved to London and Europe in the last 12 months. Nobody knows this. And it's because obviously the SoftBank explosion has damaged everybody's plans and reputations. And many VCs in the US have noticed that European entrepreneurs build better companies for a lot less money. So in the last 6 months, major VCs, major names, Greylock Partners, you know, they are in London with US money. And at the same time, a handful of European VCs have raised funds that are unprecedented in European fund sizes, like 400 million euros. You know, Balderton Capital raised a 400 million euro fund just in November. Norzon Ventures, another 400 million. Why? Because the EU 2 years ago in the Horizon 2020 created a huge pocket of funding to the limited partners that invest in venture capital. And finally, the money has cascaded. Finally, it has cascaded towards the end of 2019. And when a new fund is created, this is the time that you go visit them, because the first 2 years of a fund is when they must invest a huge portion of the money. So they will be all ears about what you have to offer. If you approach a fund in the year 4 and 5 of the life of the fund, then like, you know, the money is to sustain the former investments, they're more cautious. So this is the time to go now. That's
a great call to arms to finish with. I think I'm very aware that you've got a panel session to join, but that's been absolutely fantastic. Whilst you can't see the rest of the participants, I know they'd be giving a lot of that.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
If they could, but it's been really great, and we look forward to hopefully working together again in the future.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure.